everyone. Glad to be part of this endeavor, even though it is early in the morning here in the eastern part of the United States. But this is a topic that is very near and dear to me and has been for quite a while. To give you a little bit of an idea about my background, I started off in nuclear security at the Y-12 National Security Complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And I spent about 20 years there, and starting out as just a security guard, and then as the Safeguards and Security Program, as it's known in the U.S. Department of Energy. As it expanded over the years, I was fortunate enough to be involved in many different types of growth in a security program. And I became a special response team commander. I was involved with being certified as a crisis negotiator. I was an emergency medical technician for about 8 years because our guard and fire departments were combined for a long time. So I've actually worked on both the security side and the fire department side. But I've also been involved with some very good people from the U.S. That were involved in the nuclear material accounting and control, because at a facility like Y-12, where uranium is processed and comes in many different forms, we had to do a lot of coordination between us in order to maintain the operations as they needed to be done, and meet all kinds of different timelines and production requirements set upon us by the U.S. Department of Energy. Later on, I transferred over and began working in the Russian Federation as part of the Material Protection Control and Accounting program there in the areas of nuclear nonproliferation. I've been fortunate to spend 2 years at the International Atomic Energy Agency, where I've probably met some of you through the 2 years I was there as the nuclear security training officer. And at the agency, I was in charge of the Nuclear Security Support Center network and the International Network Nuclear Security Education Network that began with Andrea Broniger Gulich, and I took over the reins from her at the IAEA and got to meet many different people from many different walks of life, and I'll always be thankful for that. And I came back to the United States for just less than a year and ended up moving to Kazakhstan and living in what was then Astana, and setting up nuclear security training programs there for the Kazakhstan nuclear sites that still exist in the country, and the Kazakhstan National Guard, which are part of the Ministry of Interior. So I've got this varied background of doing vulnerability assessments, doing all kinds of different things. I've worked in information security, personnel security. I've done a little bit of everything. But this topic of the 3 S's has always piqued my interest, because, as most of you know that work in facilities, these 3 disciplines of safety, security, and safeguards, they must work together, but it's to the benefit of the facility as a whole. And that's part of what my presentation today is going to be about, and some discussion and some examples of that. So I see that we've gotten quite a few results here from our poll. Most everyone seems to be from security. Glad to see we have a safety representative, because we're going to talk about you in a little bit, and some safeguards colleagues. And then, if you're not sure which one you most closely identify with, you probably identify with all of them, and it can lend some expertise and some opinion and some good input to this presentation as we get closer to the end. So Carl, if we can just get started with the presentation, I think we can come back to Mentimeter a little bit later, and I'll finish my introduction. So this is let's move on to the agenda. This is what I'm going to try to talk about, and I invite you to share your questions, your comments, and particularly your insights, because no one has all of the answers. No one has an idea what the actual best practices might be. We all have our own practices, and we tend to gravitate, if you will, more toward what we're most familiar with. So some of the things I'll talk about today may be a bit out of the ordinary, but it's just to generate some of the thought processes that we all must go through in order to discuss something like this that is not necessarily part of the mainstream discussions, I think, that are done in any of the three disciplines individually. So I want to start off with just a brief definition about the individual programs, and then we'll share some ideas, I think, about overlapping and interfacing between the three disciplines themselves. And I'm going to make a statement and try to support that statement, if you will, about the integration of these three disciplines, and my belief that neither of the three can do that independently or even together, because one will always take precedent over the other. So we must take more of an operations perspective as we explore ways to further demonstrate and explain this. And then I'll talk about some practical examples at the end that will stir up maybe some additional discussion. So Carl, let's go to the first slide, and this is the individual IAEA programs. Now, these are taken from documents of the IAEA, and as we know, a couple of these programs are much stronger than the nuclear security program, and there's reasons for that. For instance, nuclear safety has been around for 50 plus years and has really evolved into a very mature program. The IAEA safety standards are those that the world looks to when they're getting into either new nuclear power programs, or there's questions about research reactor and its operations, and safety measures need to be there. And even more so, in my experience over these last several years, a lot of the radioactive source facilities like oncology centers and academic institutions where a lot of research goes on, the nuclear safety standards now are being applied, I think, much more broadly, which is a good thing, and I think it's very well needed. Nuclear security, however, has only really been in existence, about 12 or 15 years, I think, at the IAEA, and has evolved into its own division. And when I was there, it was still an office and was in a period of transition. But the nuclear security summits that occurred back a few years ago, those really brought to the forefront the need to discuss nuclear programs and nuclear facilities with an emphasis on the security aspects of those against certain types of threats. Now, I'm not going to get into all those kinds of threat discussions. That's not what this is for. But that is one of the main drivers for having discussions about nuclear security and the emphasis on nuclear security as part of any facility's operations. And of course, we're all familiar with nuclear safeguards. It is probably the one of the most important programs that the International Atomic Energy Agency is involved in, and that is something that really ties in the responsibilities of safe and peaceful use of atomic energy and atomic materials. So the definitions here, you'll notice in nuclear safety, and we've all talked about these things before, some of the synergies and some of the similarities between the three and what their emphasis might be. But you can see within nuclear safety, it's the key words there to me, talking about the three S's, is the prevention of accidents and mitigation of accident consequences. And of course, all three have a very strong focus on protection of workers, the public, and the environment from radiation risks. If you go to the nuclear security definition, you can see that it has some different wordings. Now, it's about protecting people and the material, but it's the prevention, detection, and response to unauthorized acts. And that's the primary difference that we all know is present when we talk about safety and security together. Is one is focused on accidents and preventing accidents, those things that we don't mean to happen necessarily. And then from a security standpoint, there are malevolent actors out there that want to either steal, divert, or otherwise sabotage nuclear facilities for one reason or another. Again, that's tied to the various threat levels. But there's also an interface there, a natural interface between safety and security. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, nuclear safeguards is always treated as somewhat of a separate program, simply because it's protecting and maybe here it's a technical measures applied where the agency independently of any member state verifies that nuclear facilities are not being used for purposes that they are not really intended to be used. It diverts from the peaceful use of nuclear energy. So I wanted to start off with these definitions just to put us all in the right perspective about the way these three disciplines operate in any facility around the world. And so from this start, let's go and take another poll and ask you what I think is a very important question. Which of these three disciplines, safety, security, and safeguards, has the most impact on the other two? So we'll pause here for just a few minutes, let you think about that, and let's see what the results of the poll turn out to be. And don't be afraid to change your mind.
Thanks, David. I think we've got good spread there. We've got 30 seconds left. I can see a few in the chat as well. Excellent. Oh, to send the Menti code again. Apologies. Absolutely. So I can see then there. Sorry, let me send in the code again. Thanks all. And there we go. All panelists and attendees. Code again in the chat for you. And we have an extra one in the code, David, saying that safety impacts most.
Yeah, I see that. Okay.
Oh, 2 for safety in there.
Yeah, for those of you that are joining now, the code is actually at the top of this Mentimeter slide. Now, so far the results I think are very interesting. That most everyone that are with us this morning see that they are all equally impacting the others. Um, and this is indicative of some of the issues that we run into when we talk about the integration of these three disciplines, is because from the individual perspective, of course, they're all very, very important. And the fact that they even exist within any facility means that someone is really taking a very close look at each one of these. We're getting even more results now. Now the bars look like everyone has an opinion in their discipline.
Excellent, thanks, David. I'm going to stop sharing, if that's, stop the vote if that's the case. So thank everyone for the votes, and back to you, David.
Okay, so if you this bar chart is very interesting because every one of us in our disciplines, those that work in safety or work around safety a lot, or security or safeguards, we tend to gravitate our opinions more toward our discipline that we are focused on in our jobs or in our areas of interest. And so I think that's a natural progression that we see when we take a poll like this. But it also illustrates, I think, and that's why I'm even here today, to talk about the need to look at it from a slightly different perspective when we talk about the integration of those. And let's go on to the next slide and get away from the individual programs and look at this little diagram. And I think Brian Wode, who I spent my 2 years working alongside at the IAEA, he developed this slide, and I told him I was going to steal it because I thought it really put things in perspective. And this is about one of my favorite words, and that's synergy. You know, things that are synergistic, it means that you can accomplish more working together than you can accomplish working independently. So when we talk about protection of nuclear material and associated facilities, the three S's are designed as programs and disciplines to prevent the malfunction of systems and human errors, to decrease the number of human errors that might take place. We can talk all day about that. Also, from a security perspective, to prevent malevolent acts by non-state actors. So that's those threat levels that we talk about all the time. There's safety threats and there's security threats, but they each are the idea of threats is approached from a different perspective for each one of those. And then, of course, safeguards is there to prevent misuse of materials and facilities by the state itself. So it's more of an independent internal check of a member state. So these three are always in operation, particularly where there's safeguards agreements in place and additional protocol agreements. These are always present in the facility. And in some respects, if you look at it holistically from a facility standpoint, there's always some level of competition between the three at various points in the operation. And that's part of why I'm doing this talk today and presenting some of these ideas. So let's go on to the next slide. I think this is number 5. So let's look at some indicators of the need to overlap and interface these three disciplines, these three S's. I took a statement out of the IAEA GSR document, Part 1, Requirement 12. It says there very plainly that a member state needs to focus on establishing an interface of safety with arrangements for nuclear security and with the state system of accounting for and control of nuclear materials. So that in itself is enough of a single statement if we're looking for one glue stick to bring the three disciplines together. That statement alone puts things in perspective that is one of the things member states should think about doing. They should think about these three S's and how they work together and strengthening that relationship, that integration of these three. Now, I pulled some statistics from the IAEA website, and these are the latest statistics that are posted. And I didn't realize the numbers had increased so much since I worked there, but safeguards have been applied in 182 member states around the world, with 174 having comprehensive agreements. And there's a little over 200,000 significant quantities of nuclear material that are under IAEA safeguards. Now, those are still very high numbers when you think about it, even though these are global numbers. And then you add on to that some of the new nuclear power programs that are starting. We have 440 power reactors as of April of last year, 55 new reactors under construction. And I know there's a lot of activity in many countries to establish these new nuclear power programs. 109 reactors and 329 more reactors are proposed. That comes from the IAEA safety website, and that does not include yet any of the conversations that are ongoing about modular reactors. Now, those I'm sure they'll be licensed and put in place the same as a static site power reactor. But a lot of that about the modular systems are currently being developed and figuring out how to regulate those. So these numbers don't even include some of those modular reactors. And then the last bullet on this slide, I think, was a very interesting data point that came out of the 2020 Nuclear Threat Initiative Index report. And this is an excerpt of that. And the key words to me that spoke volumes is that the index indicated that the attention to nuclear security has waned, that it's gone down, that we're not focused on the security aspects of protecting nuclear and other radioactive materials and their associated facilities as defined by the IAEA. So let's take another poll, Carl, and let's see how everybody feels. Do you feel that nuclear security and the attention to it has waned, or is there just more emphasis on the other disciplines? Is it decreasing from the nuclear security side, or just increasing on the others because there seems to be more attention posed there around safety and safeguards? And we'll pause here just a moment to give you a chance to answer.
Excellent. Thanks, David. I've just put the code in there as well for everyone. chat in case you've already missed it. But thanks to everyone who's put the codes in for other people as well. So that's really appreciated. David, so far it looks like people think more emphasis is applied elsewhere.
Okay, voting is about to close. It's now closed, and it looks like it's 2-1 that people feel that more emphasis has been applied elsewhere. Not so much so that nuclear security attention has been decreased over time, but we're more focused on the safety aspects, the safeguards aspects, and maybe even the operational aspects of some of these type facilities. Now, one factor, and this is just a theory, so I'll throw it out there for your consideration. And my theory is that nuclear security encompasses so many other things. If you look at the difference between the IAEA wheel of safety and the wheel of security, those two diagrams, there's so many other things included in nuclear security that I think it decreases everyone's attention on nuclear security holistically, because there's physical protection, there's nuclear material accounting and control measures, there's cybersecurity, information security, personnel security, all of those response forces, all those are encompassed in this heading of nuclear security. And there's a lot of debate that goes on somewhat culturally, I think, in the international community about what is most important even within nuclear security. And we'll get into some of that discussion, I think, as we move on later on. So let's go on to the next slide. I appreciate that poll because that's very interesting. That's very interesting perspective. So let's talk just a little bit right now about these areas of overlap and interface between the three. So if we take a facility and we sort of dissect it into some areas, I picked three here that have impacted me in my career of working mostly in response force areas, physical protection, nuclear material accounting and control. These are the ones that I see as biggest areas where overlap can and should occur in any type of facility that has nuclear or radioactive materials. So if we look at it and dissect it that way, so building and containment structures, there's an advantage of having buildings and from a safety standpoint, containment structures, because that's what protects us from the environmental conditions and mitigates some of the impacts if an accident should occur. So from a safety standpoint, that is a perspective of looking at the buildings and the containment structures. These are good things. And there have been lots of changes over the last 25, 30 years to the requirements for the safety of these structures and these containment facilities, particularly at nuclear power plants. And that's from a safety perspective. But when you put your security glasses on, we look at it, and here I am talking from a security perspective, we look at it as delay barriers. If someone's going to attack a facility to either steal material or do some type of sabotage action, each one of those doors, each one of those walls, each one of those ceilings, they delay that outsider adversary from being able to get into a facility and do some of these malevolent actions. They also provide hardened boundaries where a containment vessel around a nuclear power plant is usually made out of concrete and steel. And so that's a very significant barrier. And it also allows the compartmentalization of materials and operations and decreasing the population of people that are allowed in there simply because you have these types of barriers. And from a safeguards perspective, these building and containment structures offer dedicated and verifiable facilities. When you do a design information verification review under a safeguards agreement, you're looking at the building and the containment structures of the facility itself. So those are standardized protections, and that's what the safeguards program sort of expects from its member states when they sign these safeguards agreements. They want to know, have there been any changes in the physical structures surrounding any of the materials that are under international safeguards? So those are ways, just looking at buildings and containment structures, the various perspectives that each of the three S's have, but that they also it also pulls them together. Access controls is another one that provides us a really good idea of how these three S's overlap and interface, because from a safety standpoint, access control allows us to limit the populations. Only authorized people need to be in there, people who have been through trainings or certifications or whatever it is, that know what the procedures are, know how to protect things, know how the safety measures have to be integrated into the operations. And it's also a way, we use a lot of access controls in the US, and I know they do in the UK and other places around the world that I've been to. We set parameters for that access, and you can't go into an area unless you've had radiation contamination training, or you can't handle materials unless you've had certain types of criticality safety training. And safe geometry comes into play there too when you talk about access controls, access to materials. From a security perspective, of course, only authorized personnel, that's a strong interface with safety, and it also provides layered protection. So when you look at these diagrams of facilities, the access controls designate the various levels from outside to the vault areas or the process areas where nuclear material is actually present. And so the access control systems are used to designate those layers of protection. And then from a safeguards perspective, the access control system that's in place provides for that safeguards agreement verifiable records and very positive controls, so that they have assurances, the agency, that only authorized personnel are getting access to some of these facilities. Now, from an NMAC perspective, and I'm not even going to get into here the difference between nuclear material accounting and control and the state system of accounting and control. Those are very closely related, and they each have their own perspective. So I'm not going to get into that discussion, but from a safety standpoint, having a strong accounting and control system means that I can set in a process facility, for instance, like where I worked at Y12, you can set process limits from a safety standpoint, and you can control how much material is available at any one time in a process area. That helps us, especially in the area of transportation security. And of course, safe geometries and criticality protection within the operating areas, those are safety measures, but they also provide some level of security, because these storage arrays and things that you would see in an operating facility also give us parameters around which we can put in detection systems and some additional physical protection or physical security measures. And that's what goes into the safety process alarms, when you have material flows and those kinds of things, the use of tamper indicating devices. I've had this discussion with my NMAC colleagues many times over the years. The tamper indicating devices can be used for accounting and control. It can be used for safeguards purposes, but it also is a physical protection measure because you can build into that a level of detection that goes in along with the rest of the alarm monitoring system. And of course, alarm storage is part of that security profile. From a safeguards perspective, the NMAC program that a facility implements or even a state implements for its own edification, for its own knowledge about its own materials, those are active measures that support the state system of accounting and control that has to be reported back to the International Atomic Energy Agency. So let's go on to the next slide. And this is where to me, in this presentation, the rubber meets the road. And I'm making a statement here with this slide that the integration of these three S's must happen from an operations perspective, because any one of the three disciplines will always take precedent, and anyone from safety or security or safeguards who tries to lead that will always have that perspective from their own discipline. So if we look at it from an operations perspective, and in my career and in the facilities I've worked in and many that I've visited around the world, safety has always taken the lead as far as a programmatic priority for any operation in any nuclear facility. Best example I can give, I was working a project in Belarus, and we were upgrading some access controls and physical protection measures in a vault area in a building. And we ran afoul of the fire safety requirements for safe evacuation of personnel. And because of that, we had to modify our security posture and the design of some of those upgrades to facilitate the evacuation of personnel in accordance with the fire safety standards. And so we always, in my opinion, and take this for what it's worth, we always modify our security posture to meet safety requirements, because safety always has been a priority for us. Safeguards activities are also influenced by operational necessity. That's in there because, in my experience, even if you have a safeguards agreement, the inspections and things are usually scheduled around operational convenience. If the reactor has to operate during a certain week, then inspections can't take place because it's just not safe. And so the operational requirements take precedent over that. Doesn't mean they don't happen. It's just that the schedule is impacted by the operational necessity. And the integration of the three S's can be best recognized from an operations perspective. So let's go to the next slide, Carl, because I created this little diagram, and it's pretty simplistic. But if you're looking at the integration of these three S's from an operations perspective, we look first on the right at the nuclear safety. We have standards, we have safety systems. All those are in play. All of them are very important to the continued operation of the facility, successful operation, I should say. And then over on the left-hand side, that circle is about nuclear security. And I just put the two major disciplines within nuclear security, but there are lots of others. That includes the response forces, that includes vulnerability assessments, it includes personnel security, cybersecurity, those kinds of things. And then under nuclear safeguards at the bottom, the yellow circle, we have the inspections and the verifications that take place for the International Safeguards Agreement to do its job. But they're all, you see, around the operations, and they're all focused and they're only there because of the material and processes that are within that facility. So if we're going to talk about how these integrate, they only integrate within the overall operations of the facility. And so that's why that circle is there in the middle. So let's go and take another poll, Carl. I think this will be the last one. And this is an important point here because there's much discussion these days about the convergence of cybersecurity with all these other various disciplines. So which of those four circles is most dependent on a strong cybersecurity program? Which of them needs more cybersecurity emphasis than the other? And let's see what everybody thinks.
Thanks, David. I'll put the diagram back up. I'll switch between them periodically, just so people can remember them. But excellent. I think, there we go. Just open it around in case people need to see what the diagram looks like again. Otherwise, David, you've got a bit of chat and some questions about cyber already coming in. So I think good question there. So 20 seconds or so until the last. It closes.
Okay, I'll go ahead and speak because we're about to run out of time. See, what this shows me is, and we have some chat opinions going on too on the side, is that we perhaps at this particular point in time, even as we talk about the integration of safety, security, and safeguards, and looking at it from an operations perspective, everything is predicated on those facilities and the operations part of it. So maybe from a cyber perspective, we need another circle in that diagram. And maybe the way to look at it is to encompass all of the other four circles within a cybersecurity circle. So instead of having something there that looks like Mickey Mouse, we would have Mickey Mouse inside another cyber circle, because you're right. And I think the poll indicates that each one of these disciplines is impacted either positively or negatively by the status of a cybersecurity program. Let's face it, both nuclear safeguards and nuclear security are highly, highly dependent on data. It's protecting data. There's a lot of data that needs to be protected there. From a safety and an operations standpoint, those are the actual facilities, and many of the facilities, and we see many examples of this. In fact, at King's College, that's one of the big examples where hackers have gotten into the safety systems and the operating systems of different types of processes. And so I think that's that's something that we could actually explore maybe later in another webinar. Okay, I think that's the last slide. Carl, and we've run out of time. We're right at that. We're right at the end. I did want to put in here a practical example, just the application of TIDs. I mentioned that a few minutes ago, and alarm systems. And for a nuclear research facility, all of these come into play. And this is a practical example of where the three S's are integrated in a very comprehensive manner in a nuclear research facility. And I've seen this over and over and over again at facilities I've got to visit over the years. So with that, I'll wrap up the presentation and we can open it up, I guess, to some of the questions and answers. And Carl, I'll leave it up to you how you want to handle that.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you, David. That is certainly fantastic. Let me close this down. I'll stop sharing my screen. Nope, that's just sharing another screen up. Stop share. Fantastic. Thank you, David. That was really interesting. And yeah, some very interesting poll results there too. So an excellent presentation. I guess while people are thinking about the questions, and we do have a couple already in the Q&A box, so thank you for those. Please do, yes, use the Q&A box rather than the chat function. But just while we're getting started, David, what ways can academia and industry become more involved to demonstrate how to integrate the three S's? Is there a way we can do that through academia, through industry?
Oh, I think so. Well, even academic institutions today are involved in a lot of nuclear research, and there's a lot of nuclear reactors used for research by academia, but they're usually operated by some industrial partner or something from an operational perspective. My idea, and you and I have talked about this briefly, and I'll not dwell on it too much, but I think that we should find some facilities, either physical facilities, or if a member state or a country has virtual facilities that could do this. But I think we ought to look at the operational processes in the different types of nuclear facilities and dissect those down into individual processes, and then identify what are the safety measures that are present here, what are the security measures that are present here, what are the safeguards measures that are present here, so that they can be examined individually and collectively within process areas within a facility. And I think that is where the academic community and the industrial community can come together and help the disciplines better understand how they can work together within these operating facilities.
No, thank you, David. I think we have a fairly privileged position in that we're not constrained by traditional stovepipes. So certainly, absolutely, that makes great sense to me, and thank you so much for that. I'm just going to turn quickly to the Q&A chat function there. So we've already got a couple in there. So first question is from Arthur, and I think this came up as during your presentation, perhaps before you questioned cybersecurity, but no mention of cybersecurity threat, I guess, at least initially. Are we overconfident that nuclear IACS cannot be hacked?
I think anything can be hacked. You know, even in the security realm, I hear people tell me all the time, well, we have this central alarm station and this physical protection system and all these alarms and cameras, and it's air gapped. No one can get into that and hack into that system. And I'm a firm believer that any system can be hacked, particularly when you think about the insider threat. And we cannot just discount the ability of an insider to influence that and be part of that. And I know there at King's College, that has become a big discussion point in some of the insider threat seminars. So I think any system is subject to being hacked. but that's my opinion.
Thank you, David. And I think absolutely about the diagrams of circles and to have a cybersecurity around all of them. I can certainly see the sense in that. So thank you, Arthur, for that, and your comments in the chat as well, between you and Robin. That's some great. A question from Chris. What do you think about the Dole 4 incident? Was that a failure in safety, security, or the interface? So just for people, do you want to explain the Dole incident for people who may not be familiar with that? Or shall I do that, David?
No, I'm not familiar with it, so you'll have to do that.
I'm sure there are much more capable people on the call than me, but to the best of my memory, I think at Dole 4 in Belgium, I think something like 20,000 litres of lubricating fluid were drained in an act of internal sabotage. And internally, the only access control to that, I think, was a padlock over the valve. But effectively, an insider threat was able to cause substantial damage to the facility at Dole 4. And yeah, so whether or not the question is, would an insider threat like that, is that a failure in safety or security or a combination of them?
Well, we've had this discussion before in South Africa, actually, with Coburg. A similar situation occurred where something happened that was defined as an accident. A maintenance person dropped a bolt down into one of the safety systems and shut the reactor down for a period of time. It was classified as a safety accident. Maintenance fella dropped that down in there, but no one ever considered whether or not what the intent was of the person. Was there malevolent intent? Was it actually an accident, or was it an act of sabotage? And so in these cases, what's hard about them these days is getting the right people to look at any incident that causes an interruption of the operation of the facility, whether it's a nuclear power plant, a research reactor, or whatever, but look at it from the safety and the security perspective. Was it an accident, or was there malevolent intent there for some reason? And a full investigation needs to be done. In this case, I would say that it's probably a failure of both safety and security. And if the safety people and the security people talked more about the protection of that very important system, they would both agree that the protection needs to be more robust. Now, how that's done and still meet the safety requirements and minimal security requirements, that takes some give and take, and it takes some discussion. But I think it was a failure on both parts, probably because they didn't talk.
No, thank you, Dave. I think that makes sense about the complementary nature of all three of the S's. And I'm just looking at the chat function as well as the Q&A, and Robin's put some good things in the chat. But just in relation to preparing the next generation, so they have all three S's and a culture of them embedded in their thinking from the beginning, so they can instinctively design and operate, I think, with that complementary nature in mind. And he also puts, he totally agrees, it's much easier to design against the idiot, much harder to design against the determined malevolent.
Yeah. Well, I see there's a question there from my old buddy, David Smith.
Over to you, David. Yeah, and hi, David, thanks for your question. Great to see you.
Yeah, the synchronization of safety, security, and safeguards, the role of the state nuclear regulator is paramount. And I would offer that it's very important for one reason that I've seen, is because in all of the partner programs that operate around the world today, where the different countries are collaborating and cooperating, and there's agreements signed, and everyone's trying to increase either safety, security, or safeguards. the regulator tends to be the single point of contact for all of the international programs. If you go into any of the member states and you say, okay, and I'll use the US as an example because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So the US Department of Energy has non-proliferation programs. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency has non-proliferation programs, Department of State, everybody. But the single point of contact that they all have, usually within a country that they're cooperating with, is that national regulator. So that's the logical focal point, and probably the most important organization with any country that is going to have to look at these integration of these three S's. Good question. Thanks.
Thanks, David. And thanks to David Smith for asking that as well. David, I know we're up to the hour, but we've got 3 questions left in the Q&A, if you're happy to go through those.
I'm not going to bed again, so this is okay with me.
Marvelous, thank you. We have a question from Abdullah. How can a nuclear facility reduce the overlap between the 3 S's? Do you want to reduce the overlap, or do you want to increase the overlap?
No, I think I think one way that the nuclear facility can reduce that overlap is by not being so territorial. Now, that may not sit well with some people, but we have a tendency when if we're going to be in violation of a safeguards agreement, for instance, that has a whole new level of consequences just from the fact that we're violating an agreement that's been formed with the IAEA. But if a facility has a nuclear security plan or a big overarching agreement with their own regulator of how things are going to be protected from a security standpoint, how systems are going to be operated from a safety standpoint, to me, that's almost as bad or worse than a potential violation of a safeguards agreement, because those are the ones internally who have to agree to protect the materials and the facilities for their own edification, for their own systems, for their own welfare of their population and the state itself. So, I guess in other words, if each one of those disciplines was more focused on the good of the whole rather than the good of their individual program, then I think you could reduce some of that overlap between those 3 S's, because it would blur those lines.
No, thank you, Dave. And I guess that stresses the importance of leadership. You need strong direction to direct that. That's not necessarily going to happen organically. Excellent. We have 2 more questions, so thank you so much before we wrap up. A question from Anonymous. If integration of the 3 S's can be biased by whichever S is leading, can the same not be true if led from an operational viewpoint? So the integration becomes operationally biased. Is that perhaps a case of having to choose between the most appropriate bias for the individual solution?
Well, I would offer that, of course, it will become biased from an operational perspective. But when's the last time anyone has had someone from operations at a facility talk about the integration of 3 S's? It doesn't happen. And that's what the whole purpose of this presentation was, to bring to the forefront that yes, we need that operational bias, because the other 3 are going to focus on their particular viewpoint, but they're all talking about those facilities that are under operational control of operations. So we need that operational bias.
Thank you, David. And I've just got the last question here from Ali, and perhaps maybe this ties it all together. So thank you, Ali, for asking this. Who thanks you for the presentation. And he has a question, I think, about nuclear security culture. Do you think nuclear security culture promotes synergy amongst the three S's, or just does it primarily work for the security part, or can it promote synergy?
I'm a little different than everybody else. I don't think that I think we should be past that point of having a nuclear safety culture or a nuclear security culture. I think we need to move into having more of a nuclear, I don't know, protection culture, so that we can talk about these things in a more integrated fashion. So nuclear security culture, because of its name, emphasizes more the security aspects, just like nuclear safety culture, just by its name, focuses more on the safety aspects. So somehow we have to evolve past that point, I think, and look at culture. Again, this goes back to the operations. You're talking about the processes and the facilities where materials are located. So that culture has to encompass everything. It's like um, integrated management. So you can look, and there's guidance documents all over the world for different uh, proponents of integrated management, integrated safety management, integrated security management. Well, what's wrong with just having integrated management that encompasses all of that? It has to be included anyway, because that's the only way the facility can operate anyhow. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And we have one very last question from G. Leslie, if that's agreeable to you, who snuck in just under the wire. So if, as you say, no nuclear system is unhackable, have all systems at nuclear sites, do you have manual overrides so that catastrophes can be avoided? So the whole plant can be operated purely manually if absolutely necessary. If that's not the case, is that not irresponsible or reckless? Is there a way, I think, of, and I think this points a dynamic between temptation to increasingly network and operationalize our systems, and the need for redundancy and to be able to manually control things at all times. Is there a tension between those two?
Well, I think there has to be a balance between that. And there are some things that lend themselves to automation and being operated by computers. We're surrounded by examples of that in our personal lives today. I have this, we talk about bias. I have this bias in my car against adaptive cruise control. I hate it. And because the car and the computer is maintaining my distance from the car in front of me, as if I don't have sense enough as a good driver to maintain that distance myself. So I think there's a lot of similarities between that. I think there's certain aspects of operations that, yes, they should be manual, they should be operated by people. And then there's some that it makes sense to automate those, computerize those, and take it out of the human's hands. But we have to do that intelligently, because we do know there is an insider threat. And so just moving it over to the computer does not eliminate that threat. Having people involved also, of course, means that threat is present. So we have to do that intelligently, but I think there's a place for all of it to happen. That may be why we need that, as one of the questions was, and one of the points is that maybe we need a matrix, maybe we need that other circle, so that we factor the cyber security aspects into everything we do, simply because we're surrounded by those cyber systems in all aspects of our lives, which means it's at work too. So Um, there has to be a balance, but we have to do that, I think, much more intelligently in the future, and not just wholesale make changes. A good example in physical protection, and I'm sorry to take so much time, but a good one in physical protection, and I hear it all the time. Well, we're going to replace the guards at the perimeter fence and the access control point. We're going to replace all the guards with these automated rotogates with badge readers and some type of biometric access control device. Well, that's fine. You can do that. You can take all the guards off and everybody just swipes their badges and they use their hands or whatever to gain access to the facility. But when you add in to that access control point radiation portal monitors and metal detectors to detect contraband coming in and material trying to be stolen going out through the portal, now you have to have some of that human interface to resolve those alarms. So you can't just totally throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. You have to have that balance, and it takes a level of reasonableness to be able to reach those types of decisions.
Well put, David. Thank you so much, and thank you there, Leslie, for the last question. So, David, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm going to call time and just say thank you so much for letting us draw on your time, your expertise, and your passion for this. I think that's really come through. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time as well. We're going to send around a short survey about the presentation, but also about the webinar program in general. I've put it in the chat box for you there, although we'll also send it around by email. Please do take the time to have a look at this and to fill it out. It's really useful for us and really helpful for our sponsors too. But just to say, David, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you. We don't have a webinar next month. August tends to be a holiday month here in the UK. So we'll be back in September, where we'll be joined by Wendy Anster, who'll be taking us through some of the, I guess, occupational health side of working in a nuclear plant. Otherwise, David, thank you so much. Everybody, stay safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, David.
Thanks.
See you.